Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Every week, I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. One of the things you'll see in Honolulu and throughout the neighbor islands over and over again as we walk through our streets is the presence of the homeless. Many remark that we see more homeless on the streets, including children, than we've ever seen in Hawaii's history. And studies show that that's the case. We are now, per capita, the highest rate of homelessness in the nation. What can be done about this? A lot of work is going on the ground level, providing people with food, clothing, shelter. We have many charities and government agencies. And yet we also need to deal with the law itself at times, as well as policy produced by our state legislature and government. There is one organization that is tirelessly at work defending the rights of the poor, and I'm proud today to be able to introduce to you a new friend of mine, Victor Geminiani. He's the co-executive director, and he's been the founder of the Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, fighting for the rights of the least advantaged here in Hawaii. Victor, welcome to the program.
Welcome. You pronounced my name absolutely perfectly. You must have some Italian in you.
Geminiani.
Oh, paisano.
Well, aloha to you.
Aloha.
Lucky you live Hawaii, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We do. And
absolutely.
You know, just at the outset, you've got a fabulous education. At one point, you had the opportunity to be a corporate lawyer in the Wall Street world and so forth, but you've decided instead to advocate for the poor and devote your life to that. You are actually one of the leaders in that field, pioneering legal advocacy for the least advantaged and bringing that to Hawaii, and you founded the Appleseed Center. Tell me why.
Well, that's a easy question. I came of age during the 60s, and social consciousness was a major issue. The music, the culture, what was happening politically, the civil rights movement. The second, I think, is my religion. I was raised as a Catholic. I'm a Catholic boy for 20 years, from kindergarten all the way through law school. And that these Jesuits sort of trained you to be responsible for others, use your talents, use your God-given talents for some better thing than just your own needs. And to be frank with you, I love what I do. It gives me a sense of furthering the values that I believe this country stands for, and I believe we all stand for, in terms of using our talents the best way possible to make a real difference in the lives of all of us. We're here professionally 40, 50 years on the planet, and we might as well spend that time doing something we really enjoy and that are productive and beneficial to others as opposed to just ourselves.
It's refreshing when I talk with you and have learned of some of your staff and the endeavors of Appleseed, because very often we get weary of the homelessness issue in Hawaii. And I'm not blaming anyone for that or judging.
We all do.
We get weary of being approached on the street by those begging. We get weary of not knowing what to do, which sidewalks to move them onto next, and so forth. Government implements strategy after strategy, and it must not be fun to be people like Scott Morishige, the coordinator of homelessness, who was recently appointed, because there's a lot of blame here. And yet, you defy the idea of NIMBY, not in my backyard. You actually go to the backyards of people who are at need. What do you attribute Hawaii's rising homelessness problem to?
Well, it's not complicated, to be frank with you. It's fairly simple if you start to connect the dots. If you have a person that is low income in the state, we'll say earning $16,000, $17,000, $25,000 with a family of four, they're confronted with the highest cost of living in the United States. They're confronted with the highest cost of shelter in the United States. 78% of the people that are living at or near poverty, and that's the level I just gave you, are spending more than 50% of their income on shelter alone. Normally, the economists say you should spend no more than 30% of your income. So you have a tremendously expensive state. Electricity, food's 160% more than the mainland. Electricity is off the charts. Secondly, you have the lowest wages paid in the United States when you ultimately factor in cost of living, because we have such a high cost of living. When you factor in what wages people are actually being paid, statistically, we have the lowest wages paid in the United States. We call it the price of paradise. We want to live here, so we sacrifice. We all do that. And thirdly, we have a tax system that's one of the worst in the United States. It's actually the third worst in the United States in terms of taxing people, low and moderate income individuals, and middle class individuals, I'd say also, because of the way we set up our tax system many, many years ago in the 30s to actually emphasize GET as the primary vehicle to generate a lot of dollars. About half our dollars that are generated on the revenue base come from GET. That's a highly regressive tax and hits the low income more than any other population.
And we're going to talk a bit about that more, but basically what you're outlining is that if we do the math, if we add the numbers up, it should be expected that the least able to survive here are going to be less able to survive.
Anytime you have a crisis in a family, You have domestic violence, you have drug abuse that occurs in one of the children, or God forbid, one of the parents. You have a loss of job. You have anything that occurs to disrupt your ability to actually work on a day-to-day basis. You're 40, 50 hours a week you're working. You're going to be on the streets because you're going to miss 2 or 3 rent payments while you're trying to recover from the economic fall. We don't have a capacity to ultimately have a large enough population that's secure paycheck to ultimately not have what we have in the streets today, a burgeoning population. And you will never stop that population until you deal with the structural issues that I just mentioned before, because they'll always, as long as those structural issues continue, have a pipeline to homelessness.
Well, this is what brought us together, actually. You were a member of a panel that Grassroots Institute recently sponsored entitled Free Market Solutions to Homelessness and Affordable Housing. And we looked at the fact that the poor are being squeezed from both directions, from the bottom up in terms of the problems they struggle with, whether it's mental health or being laid off or whatever perennial problems they face, and from the top down in terms of the condition of our economy and the tax structure and so forth. And we just really need to do something about both of these solutions. Do you see a lot going on in terms of transforming the economy or dealing with, at a policy level, with the needs of the least advantaged?
I do. I see nothing happening. Well, let me say on the tax policy issues, we were able to, there's a thing called GET food credit that's been in existence since the 70s to somewhat take care of the aggressivity of the GET tax. That had not been modified in terms of increased inflation factors for over 5 years, 6 years. We got that through the legislature last year. About $6.3 million went to low and moderate income individuals in terms of tax relief. The other one we tried to get through was a low-income renters credit, which is even worse. That is $50. Adopted in 1981, now the equivalent of about $19.60, I think. And it hasn't been adjusted since 1981. If you adjusted it now, it'd be about $125 as opposed to $50. So there are some credits that are on the books, but they haven't been given any attention in terms of upgrading them for many, many years. So we've done some work in that area.
When we talk about this, though, it's like swimming uphill. Even when it comes to these tax credits. And let's take a segue here for our viewers to talk just a little bit about what you brought up, the GE tax. GET taxation here is on virtually everything. It's a pervasive tax. It raises about half of the money in the state coffers, so it's like a sacred cow. But the people it impacts the most are those with the lowest level of income. They could
Low and moderate income.
They could spend up to 13 to 15% of all of their income on the GET tax because they are spontaneous buyers. As soon as they get money, they walk into a store. They don't have time for tax strategies
and they can't save. They're spending everything they get immediately.
And that's what you meant by regressive, because it actually hurts the least able to pay. But
they pay more of their income than other individuals
That's right.
do. If you're making $10, you're going to spend $1.30 on taxes in the state if you're low income. If you're making $10 in your upper income, you're going to spend about $8.
There you go.
It's a significant change in terms of the regressivity as it goes up the income schedule.
And I don't think a lot of people realize how much the poor in our community carry in terms of the weight of the GET tax. I mean, we look at things that we want to afford overall for everybody, like the fixed rail in Honolulu, other projects that the legislature brings up every year, and we say, let's just raise the GET by 0.25% or 0.5%, but we don't realize the regressive nature. But you've done something, but I want to ask you about that. You mentioned that Appleseed was helpful in getting a tax credit on the GET for the least advantaged. But how many know that, and how many file their taxes in order to get the credit?
Well, that's a good question. The majority of people that are ultimately eligible do, in fact, file for the credit because they file their 1040s at the end of the year, and it's included within the context of the filing for the 1040. So if you're going to file a tax return, you're going to know about the tax credit likely, especially if you have the form, you follow the form, because the form does, in fact, have the ability for you to actually implement.
But on a very practical level, how many can wait for a return? I mean, when you're living from day to day, week to week, month to month, you know, January is coming, and then April 15th is coming, and then the check is coming, and so forth. I think the direction is commendable. But it really is a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
We would agree. I mean, I would advocate for a total realignment of our tax structure if we could, but unfortunately, there's not the will to do that. So we can pick and choose the areas that at least there are in the tax code. So it's not a matter of introducing a new concept. It's a matter of just bringing up to inflation the credits that have already been given in the past.
But I do commend that work. But we'll come back to
one thing I will say is it does focus the
Yes.
legislature on understanding this
That's
problem.
right.
Before we were advocating, I don't think there were many people down at the legislature actually advocating for low-income tax reform. So at least now the legislature is quite aware, and the governor is quite aware, having been in Ways and Means for so many years, that in fact there's a serious problem in terms of the taxation policy we have for low income. The answers are a little bit more difficult because they require political will and obviously an investment.
That's right. As allies with Appleseed and other groups like yourself, Grassroots Institute, almost every time we go down to testify on bills related to tax, brings up the impact on the poor. And I think we're starting together to make a difference. In the second segment of our program today, let's come back and talk a little bit more about taxes and a better approach to them. But let's return now to the question of what causes poverty, what causes the homelessness that we see. In addition to the systemic economy, what are the real issues?
Again, it's not complicated. You have those 4 issues I mentioned in terms of the structural problems that people have to overcome if they're going to be able to survive appropriately. But secondly, you need an ability to actually rent someplace. We have not done any affordable housing rental creation in probably 40 or 50 years. I have not found one that's
absolutely.
been built.
In fact,
affordable housing has been for those that are going to be owning homes at 120, 140% of AMI. There's been nothing built for those 60% of AMI below. By that way, that's about $57,000 for a family of 4. Nothing built.
In fact, we had a developer from the island of Maui at the panel at which you spoke yesterday at the Grassroots Institute. He reported that the only affordable housing that has been completed in 10 years has taken 9 years and is still being developed. And those are 60 units. And he can count on one hand the number of affordable homes that have been able to get through the developmental hoops, the zoning laws, the regulations, and the community hearings and so forth.
As well as the financing, because there's not a lot of profit in low-income housing. What people would much rather predict, the developers in particular, is develop housing that's ultimately more profitable, which means large houses, which go for $600,000, $800,000, $900,000. So the profit margin is so low in rental housing that there has not been the ability of government to try to figure out exactly how they lower the price. And there's a whole bunch of answers to be able to do that, to be frank with you, but they all require a change of attitude about what our crisis is and how we're going to prioritize resolution of that crisis as opposed to continue business as usual.
And so when we talk about free market solutions, we're saying really to the government as politely as we can, don't interfere with the free market. Don't have such measures with regard to regulations, zoning, and so forth that inhibit market forces of supply and demand meeting together.
I would somewhat agree. I think I probably agree with you. We'd have to go through the components of that. I mean, what we ultimately are moving is the Bill 20, which just got through the City Council with ADU. I think, to be frank with you, we have not had any housing built. And the question is, what kind of housing can we build? Can we afford to build that's appropriate for our people?
And what you're talking about are accessory units.
Accessory dwelling units.
The right of a homeowner on a lot to expand, either directly connected to the building or a standalone, and these are about 800 square feet.
Well, if you have 3,500 square feet of land, as of a week ago, the City Council approved our bill. You can build a detached or attached, it doesn't matter, unit of 400 square feet. If you have a unit of land of 5,000 square feet, you can build up to 800 square feet on an attached or detached ADU in your backyards. Think of Ahana housing, but you're not necessarily restricted to renting it to your relatives. You can rent it to anybody, and any landowner can now do that. So therefore, you have an opportunity to scatter site low-income dwellers all through our community, as opposed to confront the NIMBYism when you try to build a 200, 300 unit apartment building and no community wants it. Now it's going to be neighborhood-based.
And I understand that the measure in its current form has restrictions that require a covenant for 6 months of rent, so that these can't be bed and breakfasts.
There's a lot of enforcement built in, because the biggest issue is if we allowed ADUs to be built, we're going to have a conversion of those soon into B&Bs and transitional TVUs. And there was a big resistance against that. So there's a lot of enforcement built in. First of all, any tenant that you have that you're renting your ADU in, you have to have a 6-month lease on that tenant. Secondly, you have to have owner occupancy or relevant occupying one or the other. Thirdly, if you advertise for a short-term rental on the internet and you have an ADU you're renting, it's prima facie evidence that in fact you violated the requirement to have leases at least 30 days. So, and the covenant runs with the land, so it can never be converted into something else because it runs with the land. Any buyer that buys it is going to have that covenant that's going to run and be obligated to comply with the requirements.
Well, this is similar to what we talked about in terms of the tax credit earlier. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, and we're swimming upstream, but we're doing something that's making a little bit of difference.
It's not the answer to everything. It's one of the answers.
That's
There's
right.
a series of other answers that we're involved in deeply that I think are ultimately starting to chart a future, because I think the political system and the population has finally said enough is enough. We've got to get on with what we have to do, the challenges ahead of us.
Let's come back after a short break and continue talking. I'm with Victor Geminiani, who is the head of the Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. A fascinating conversation on the causes and solutions to poverty and homelessness in Hawaii. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? That's Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
I welcome you back to Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and that's where we say Ehana Kako. I'm sure you're familiar with the venerable saying here in Hawaii, E Pule Kako, let's pray together. Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we also say Ehana Kako, let's work together. Think of the terrible alternative of not working together. Let's unite people around building a better economy, a better government, a better society. And my hat goes off to the ThinkTech Hawaii crew, as well as producer Jay Fidel. You put on 35 hours of original content from Honolulu dealing with vital issues of the day. Programs are available at www.thinktechhawaii.com. Today, we're talking with Victor Geminiani, head of the Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, about probably one of the most vital issues here in Hawaii. It's vital because it affects every single person, and it is caused in many ways by our government and perhaps maybe you and me, by our engagement or non-engagement with the issues of homelessness and the needs of the least advantaged in society. There is one group that is highly engaged in that, and that is the Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. Victor, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and we were just chatting about
my privilege.
Yes, and you had a terrific victory, the accessory dwelling unit a bill in the city and county of Honolulu that allows homeowners to increase the square footage of their homes for another family, and this is part of the solution. You know, I have to tell you frankly that this is very difficult navigating. I love it, I applaud it, and I also cringe at it. On one hand, what I love is, from a free market point of view, we're allowing property owners to do with their property what they have a right to do without the government telling them they cannot do it.
And we're taking care of affordable housing to some degree with private capital and private investment, not government investment, not government bureaucracy.
Absolutely.
Never going to be the answer.
You know, and that is praiseworthy and so forth. And yet, the process of doing this is fraught with more government regulation as to how it can be done. And there's a lot of ambiguity there, which is going to be difficult navigating overall. I suppose we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good, and that's what groups like Appleseed are out there doing on the ground level. Let's talk about some other solutions. In the break, you mentioned micro-units.
Well, again, micro-units. First of all, let's start off by understanding that 43% of our people in the state are renters.
Yes. Now, nationwide, that's an extremely high percentage of the population.
Exactly,
I mean,
because of the cost of property in our town.
We're pretty much a population of people who don't own the property. some people call that a colony, but we won't go there with the political analysis of this. But really, I mean, that's a real problem, that the wealth is not owned by the actual people. But you're talking about that.
So there 43% of our people are renters, but 35% on Oahu and 30 statewide are single renters. They don't need large areas of space. And about 6 or 7 years ago on the mainland, cities like Portland and Seattle and San Francisco and Boston and New York, areas of high cost of living, high cost of shelter, started to experiment going back to the old routine of how we used to house homeless. We're old enough to remember SROs. There used to be a lot of SROs in Chinatown. At first, my first office in legal aid down on Nuuanu was an old SRO. Basically, you had single-room occupancies all over this nation. And unfortunately, because of gentrification during the 70s and 80s and the withdrawal of the government in terms of funding new creation of affordable housing through Section 8 and other vehicles, you've had the elimination of most of those SROs.
Right. There was
a
time
back to the future.
You came into a city, nowhere to live, you could go down to the YMCA.
Exactly. Boarding houses were all over the place. You shared an eating area and a food preparation area and a bathroom, a shower with others, but you had your own room, 10 by 10, whatever it would be.
What happened to all of that?
Micro units, they got gentrified. The areas where they were became valuable areas of urban development, and they were all eliminated for all intents and purposes for better investment. So yes, micro units are really the same idea. And cities started to experiment, as I said, in the East Coast and West Coast with this concept about 5-7 years ago. They built a series of small units, 250 to 400 square feet, often just housing 1 or 2 people in, well-designed. Furniture is integrated into the development of the design so that ultimately you don't have a lot of rooms you have to walk around in. They were quite successful because of the ability to increase density, which is a critical component when you're trying to utilize land to the maximum amount possible, and elimination of potentially parking requirements because you're not going to have a car, especially if you're in an urban area, and especially if you're connected to a bus or other transit, and maybe you can't afford a car. A lot of people can't. It's expensive. So the bottom line is you can start to design efficient, effective, high-density areas that are ultimately going to be able to house people, developed a lot easier, developed a lot cheaper, and be able to go for more affordable prices than you're able to be offering currently in our current market. So we've now developed one is being developed in Kaka'ako, 600 block of Young Street. It's going to have 5 stories high. It's going to be house 100 units. The smallest units are 300 square feet. I think the largest is 450 square feet. The rents are going to be appealing to those that are below 60% of AMI. There'll be some for 30% of AMI. The majority will be below 60% of AMI. Area median income is AMI. And for here, 60% of AMI in Oahu is about $57,000 for a family of 4. So we're going to be building a model that will ultimately be able to be replicated in a serious way throughout all of our islands. Primarily along transit-oriented development construction sites that will go on along the light rail and along bus sites. A lot of land that's available. The county owns a lot of that land. If not, they can acquire some of the land to build these kinds of structures. And because they're along transit lines, you don't need cars. You don't need other types of amenities that you might have if you're living in a different kind of a facility. So we believe that the beginning of a micro-unit wave in this state, i.e. more affordable units that are designed for people that are only 1 or 2 people in the family. And again, about 35% of our renters on Oahu are just single family, head of household, only 1 person, and single renters, I should say. So that ultimately these will appeal to a number of people. We'll use that as a model, hopefully, to spread throughout the rest of Oahu, at least to the urban core of Oahu, and hopefully some of the other islands will take a look at it. That will, by its nature, start driving down the price of housing because you're going to have more availability. Once you increase the supply. The demand is going to probably remain relatively level, and you're going to have a drop in the price of housing.
Absolutely. As a concept, this is a wonderful thing to be advocating, and I'm glad for the initial forward movement on it. But one of the things that we have to encounter is the existing structure of zoning and regulation and other laws that are in place, not only that, but neighborhoods, and they're weighing into what they want to see take place. And recently our governor said that it would take perhaps 5 years to develop the affordable housing that we needed, whereas a couple of developers, including Stanford Carr, said if you cut the red tape, that could be developed within 1 to 2 years. Well, what do you think about this discrepancy?
Well, I think, to be frank with you, the way we have to deal with our homelessness is, or affordable housing, which hits a lot of people, not only the homeless, in a lot of different ways. ADUs are one way, using private investment, private capital, private entrepreneurialism. Micro units are another way, which sometimes can be done without government funding, sometimes partial government funding, sometimes can be done with a little bit government funding, especially in terms of the acquisition of land. But the permitting requirements that we've ultimately built into the entire process of being able to build housing, I think really have to need a review from top to bottom. Where I come from, if homelessness is a top priority in this state, and it appears to be from everywhere we look at, and we know we're sending out more and more populations and more kids coming from environments that are ultimately not going to be ever productive when they get to the age where they're ultimately going to be productive workers, we've got to resolve our problem. And the way you can resolve it is to take a hard look at the permitting process and make sure that all of the requirements you have are strictly required because of safety and health issues, not necessarily aesthetic issues and convenience issues. We have grown up in Hawaii and elsewhere in the United States expecting or hoping or for a particular type of housing stock, and that's what building codes are all about. We all remember single wall construction. In the old days, everybody lived in single wall. I live in single wall construction in Kailua right now, not permitted today. So there are all sorts of things that I think made sense and do make sense if you have an economy that ultimately can join with those restrictions and produce the housing we need. But if you don't, then you have to ultimately take a look at the process, the time frames in terms of how long it takes to get through DPP for permitting, and the types of permitting building code requirements that you're going to have. I will say this about DPP. I found them to be incredibly wonderful in terms of partners on the ADU issue. When we started introducing the AD issue in the City Council, we were able to join almost immediately with DPP and start to work up a variety of different ideas about how that piece of legislation that went through would be workable, not only in terms of the cost effectiveness, but also the political constraints that some neighbors confront. So bottom line is, I think we have a very good relationship, and in conjunction with them, we're developing a manual in the ADU process to be able to guide people through exactly how what process you have to go through. We're building architectural models through pro bono assistance from architectural firms so that people will be able to take it off the shelf and put it in. And all of those things both of those plans have been approved by DPP, and they have an expedited process to be able to approve ADUs. So I think there's a great model in terms of a public-private partnership with DPP and government that has obviously the responsibility to make sure our housing stock is sanitary and healthy and safe, but at the same time has the expertise and the knowledge to know where things can be changed for certain types of buildings that you're really trying to aim, for example, micro units, where you're really trying to aim for the cheapest price possible in terms of building, so you can offer the cheapest price possible in terms of rent.
What I hear you saying is that your experience in terms of developing ADU units has produced a set of best practices in terms of how to relate between private entities and the government.
We had a common agreement about what the problem is,
That's
and a common agreement about what the solution was, ADUs.
There you go.
Not the total solution, but a part of the solution. So once we had that common agreement, I found DPP to be quite easy to work with in terms of their leadership and the ability to actually agree that we're going to have an efficient, effective process to get these things through, and we're going to have permitted plans already approved that people can take off the shelf, and that we're going to have some technical assistance provided for those that are trying to find financing to start these efforts in their backyards.
Well, let's definitely try to package the process and use it from project to project. Now, let me shift gears.
Let me say one more thing on
please.
ADUs, which is really important.
All right.
People looking may think that, oh, we got to spend a lot of money to create an ADU. You can take an existing house, as long as you have 2 entrances into that house, back door and front door, and you have 2 bathrooms in each of your, if you're going to divide the house down the middle, or have 2 bedrooms on one side, 1 bedroom on the other side. If you have kitchens, which are relatively cheap to put in, and you have bathrooms that are not that expensive to put in, for $5,000 or $6,000, you can take your existing house, divide it in any way you so choose, and have it for a very low investment. And you allow, by the way, seniors, I'm 71 years old, you allow seniors to age in place because now they have some income coming in and can stay in their own property. So ADUs are not only for those that have to build $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 operations. They're people that really are smart enough and creative enough to figure out how I can use my existing premises with a little bit of modification to comply with ADUs.
And that's good news, because if you're watching now and you want to make a small investment, maybe $10,000 in your home, partition off a room, you've got a renter right here, Victor Geminiani, who might move in. And that's part of the solution to homelessness. We're going to be right back after this short message, and I'm going to talk with Victor about a couple of things. One, what needs to be done to our tax structure here in the state in order to facilitate a better life for those who are least advantaged. And secondly, I want us to approach the issue of the many voices that tend to weigh into any development project. Hawaii is a community of communities with many, many voices, and sometimes we're not on the same track together. How do we deal with that? This is Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute. We'll be right back on Ehana Kako after this short break.
Aloha, this is Reg Baker, and I am the host of Business in Hawaii. We talk about positive stories of businesses in Hawaii, how they have been successful, and how they have overcome some of the obstacles that a lot of us encounter when we try to have a business here. And believe it or not, there are a number of positive stories here, and we want to talk to all of you. So we broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it rebroadcasts again on Olelo Channel 54. So I sure hope to see you next time. Please tune in on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I host Sustainable Hawaii every Tuesday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. My guests offer insights on challenging economic and environmental issues facing our state and offer innovative solutions to increasing Hawaii's long-term sustainability. Recently, we've been focusing on sustainable land development, food, and energy security. If you have a project or issue you'd like to discuss on the show or would like to be a guest, please contact me at kirstenbturner@gmail.com and tune in live weekly or view the show at your convenience at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. If you're like all reflective people in Hawaii, you have an opinion about homelessness, and we'd love to hear from you. You could tweet and ask a question or make a comment today. ThinkTech Hi, ThinkTech HI, that's where we are, and we'll monitor your tweet as it comes in. You can give me a question or one for Victor. Now, let me get back to our guest today, Victor Geminiani with the Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. Victor, when anybody tries to do something good in Hawaii, there's always another opinion about whether that's good. And that might be one of the good things about Hawaii, that we really bring together a microcosm of the community around every issue. And there are voices that are pro-development, anti-development, pro-environment, that stand for certain interests, ethnic groups, and so forth. What kind of strategies are there for rallying the community around measures that will help the homeless, particularly more affordable housing and affordable housing in every neighborhood?
Well, ultimately, I think it's a matter of leadership. I think that the leaders of our communities, both the legislature and the city council and the mayor's office and the governor's office, really have to paint a vision of the right thing we ought to do, even though it may not be necessarily a popular thing we have to do. Affordable housing in a particular neighborhood is a classic example because of the NIMBYism reaction. But if people understand that ultimately there's a problem and can understand that the solution that's being recommended is a fair solution and have an opportunity to have some input on that solution and understand that we're all in this together. We're all on an island. We have to ultimately find a way to live as best we can for not only our own benefit, but for all of our benefits. That answers can be found, but it requires leadership, it requires courage, it requires a really good vision, and a real ability to understand the importance of process in our state, but at the same time move something forward. For example, if I were to build affordable housing in this community, because most communities are going to resist any kind of significant development of affordable housing in the community, I would urge the city council and the mayor to start thinking about some kind of way to apportion the amount of affordable housing that's necessary into the variety of communities we have, into the 9 districts that we have in the city council. So that every community understands that they're going to get their share of the solution to the problem, and they have to agree that the solution is obviously we have to create more housing that's affordable for our average citizen.
So it's a shared responsibility.
It's a shared responsibility, and you have to enforce that
person.
within the vision that you have and within the processes you use to understand what the problem is, and then get people to understand it's part of their problem too. We all have to work together in order to be able to resolve an issue like homelessness or affordable housing. And the more we put up barriers in our community to anything happening, you're going to get the reaction you get from Waianae and Lee Coast. We've had enough.
Right.
So it has to be fairly apportioned in some kind of way, and that's why I think the whole concept of the ADUs is so fascinating, because it doesn't require any apportionment. Individual landowners could do whatever they so choose to do. But ultimately, I think that it's an issue of leadership, and it's an issue of leadership not dodging an issue, but confronting the issue. And unfortunately, I think our leadership sometimes is a little late in coming to the game, homelessness being a classic example. We've been grappling with this problem now for 4 or 5 years. We've been the worst or second worst in the United States for that long a period of time, and yet we are just starting to have a vision for what exactly we should be able to do in terms of some of the issues around affordable housing.
That's right.
I haven't even gotten to safe grounds. I haven't even gotten to container development or modular development or trailer parks or all of the rest, which are all, again, components potentially of an answer to how we resolve our affordable housing, i.e. homelessness problem. So it's a matter of vision, and it's a matter of courage, and it's a matter of process, but at the same time being forceful about what we have to do to solve our problem.
I'd agree with you completely. Leadership is important, vision, courage. And when you talk about process, part of that is going to be advancing the conversation, that making it, having it go forward with all of the correct parties and the stakeholders. One example of that is the development of Kaka'ako, which was hotly contested by environmental protection groups and surfing groups and others at its inception, at the idea stage. But as time has come, the conversation has gone forward, and there seems to be a tacit understanding that we can reach a median agreement whereby we develop on the Mauka side of Ala Moana Boulevard, but not on the ocean side. And that wasn't something that came from the beginning. It came as a result of years and years of process. And at the very least, I hope we go forward with that. You wanted to talk a bit about our taxes here in the state of Hawaii. One of the things is people don't necessarily understand tax structure. Sometimes they come here because somebody said, come to Hawaii because we don't have very high property tax. They come to Hawaii, but they get slammed in many other ways. What are your thoughts as to how this affects the homelessness crisis?
Well, clearly, as I said at the very beginning, it's a structural problem that people have to overcome. Lowest wages, highest cost of living, highest tax structure impacting on the low and moderate income cries out for an answer. Some way you can break that down, and ultimately I think our tax system that's built on so much on a GET, half the income, as you mentioned before, comes from GET taxes. Our county taxes are incredibly low. We have a centralized Department of Education, the only one in the United States that has a statewide DOE. Other places around the United States, everywhere, county taxes supported. So that has produced, because the money for DOE, Department of Education, comes from GET for all intents and purposes. They have a role of revenue comes from GET. It's a statewide tax, and therefore people have let property taxes not gravitate very high. We're, as I said, one of the lowest in the United States in terms of property taxes. Ultimately, I think you have to take a look at how the tax burden is being shared by individuals throughout the entire economic spectrum and try to figure out whether, in fact, there's a fair system we can. And I think there's no doubt our system is not fair. Anybody that analyzes it knows that for low and moderate income and middle class, they are paying well above what they ought to be paying in terms of a fair tax system that proportions the expenses of the government across the board. I might mention that GET was created a long time ago in the 1930s by the Big Five when they were confronted with how we're going to fund government, and they made a decision. The Big Five, who owned everything in Hawaii, made a decision to ultimately not fund themselves through property taxes, but rather shift it to a broad-based consumer tax. And we have an incredibly effective one in the state, but it's the most highly regressive in the United States. Sales tax and property and GETs are the worst tax system you can have in terms of fairness, or one of the worst. So I think you have to ultimately start taking a look at the various structures you have that, or systems you have to tax people. I'll give you an example. Something came up yesterday at our conversation. There was a suggestion that we eliminate all medical and food expenses from GET.
That's right, as 32 states have done so far.
Yeah, but that would cost $200 million. And the problem with raising $200 million, and that, by the way, doesn't affect the poor as much as it affects a lot of other people at a lot of different levels of income. So our philosophy would be to take a look at what your problem is. And your problem is your lowest of your low are being taxed the most. And therefore concentrate whatever dollars you can scare up. If you had $200 million to scare up, you could make a major impact on the moderate and lower income salaries and people are being paid because they wouldn't be taxed so much. Whereas you try to spread that to a large base of the entire state, it spreads the money so thinly that ultimately it doesn't really benefit in a significant way the people at the bottom. So I would say, given all of our challenges, all of the government challenges to fund government, to fund the unfunded liability, all of the things we have, all affordable housing, medical care for our people, everything, education, we have to ultimately use scarce dollars, which every time you're trying to raise any kind of serious money is scarce dollars in the legislature, and target that in an effective way just to hit the population you most want to hit. If you have more money left over and you can make those hard decisions, spread it as far as you want, but always make sure you're spreading it to the people that most need the problem resolved for themselves, not necessarily filtering it all the way through the system, so people that really don't need that break are getting it.
Well, and the pill may not be so bitter to swallow for those at the higher economic levels, because when we talk about, you say, $200 million that would be taken from the GET if we stop taxing food and medicine, that's only because politicians see things in terms of their tenure of 2 years or 4 years. But when we realize that if you leave that money in the economy, it goes back into the economy.
It turns the economy.
It fuels businesses,
Exactly.
it fuels jobs, and ultimately the income taxes generated by the government are more in the long run if we have a long-term view. GET just removes spendable money from the economy.
Absolutely.
And so the economy is less productive. Now, this is something that's going to require something you and I do. We try to shape the dialogue. We have to do education of our policymakers and of the public to understand that there are principles by which a good economy operates, and we need to bring those to the fore.
I will also, just to underline your point, the population we're talking about, low and moderate income, and the
That's
homeless,
right.
are people that have no savings accounts. They don't make enough money in this state to even survive, much less save money. So as soon as they get it in their pocket, whatever it might be, any kind of tax return, any kind of reduction in your tax rate you're going to have through a credit you might apply or through a rearranging of the credit, that money immediately goes back to the economy. They spend it on essentials, and that means it's going to churn about for every dollar that goes out,
That's
it's going
right.
to churn about $1.60 in terms of the economic vitality of the state. So reducing taxes on this population, because they'll spend it immediately, is very good for the economy, because it revitalizes the economy, it churns through the economy and helps us all get to where we
It would
want to
also
get
be across the board. Everybody would be relieved of having to pay taxes on medicine and food, and that would generate more in the economy. There are common sense things we can do at a policy level, and yet there are still ground level solutions we're looking to. What do you think about the city's sit-lie ban as it's been expanded over the last
I am
several
sympathetic
months?
to the reason. The problem we have is that we have not taken care of business for many, many years in terms of the structural issues I talked about before, the 4 issues of barriers people,
Right.
and because of the lack of affordable housing being available. So ultimately, because of the failure of leadership across the state, we ultimately are confronted with this problem. And the problem, the point of the spear is down in Waikiki in terms of the problem you're going to have in terms of tourism and the ability to continue to maintain that as a base, an economic base. So I think, to be frank with you, the sit-lie is the wrong answer. It produced the answer everyone said it would produce, putting people from place to place to place. So every community ultimately is going to have some camp somewhere that next day we're going to have to demolish, and you're going to have obviously the...
Well, it pushes the ultimate issue just further down the road, and we have to deal with it
We should have
eventually.
dealt with affordable housing, or at least some answers to minimally providing shelter for some of these people before we decided on sit and lie. That's my own sense. And if we did do sit and lie for Waikiki, we should not have expanded it to as many communities as it's expanded to now, because ultimately the homeless they have to go somewhere.
Basically,
and many of them don't want to go to shelters. The bottom
That's
line
right.
is they're not going to go through the process of the mental illnesses in shelters, the stigma of being in shelters, the cacophony of sounds. If they have mental illness themselves, the worst place you can be, the restrictions of having to leave the homeless shelter at 6 in the morning and not come back until 5
That's
at night,
right.
6 at night. All of those issues are going to, some part of the population is going to say, I'd rather live under a bridge somewhere instead of going through all of the rules and regulations and steps I have to do to go to
That's
shelter.
right.
I'm not suggesting shelters are not an answer for a good part of the population. I'm only suggesting shelters are not an answer for everybody. And the politicians should have understood that you're not going to be able to drive people into shelters.
Well
It's not
said,
gonna
well
happen.
said. Now, we're going to have to close here. You've got some great wisdom for us. If people want to get a hold of the Appleseed Center, tell us what's the website and your phone number.
Sure. The website is hiappleseed.org. .org.
Very good.
It's a very extensive website.
Okay.
And all of the contact information you need is on site.
Well, Victor, I want to thank you very
My
much for
pleasure.
joining
Thank
us
you for the
today. I look
invitation.
forward to working together more in the future.
Absolutely.
My guest today has been Victor Geminiani of the Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute. We say aloha from ThinkTech Hawaii's Ehana Kako. Until next time, malama pono, which means take care.